Don't miss in the next 60 minutes. Now, civil liberties groups have described it as the Snoopers Charter. Government plan designed to monitor every email, every text message, internet site visited and social media conversation in the country. It makes you wonder how they can do that, doesn't it? Well, the coalition says the scheme is necessary to help prevent terrorist threats and have made assurances that strict safeguards will be in place to make sure the information doesn't get into the wrong hands. David Davis, the MP for Horton, Price and Howden, isn't convinced. He's described it as an unnecessary extension of the ability of the state to snoop on people, and I'm sure many other people listening will agree with that. Mr. Davis, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Do you think our privacy is under threat with this, or are we just worrying unnecessarily?
Well, yes, I do. None of us argue that there's not a case in some, not a reason for, in some criminal cases to give the police and the agencies the right to monitor people's phone calls, intercept them, listen to them even, and ditto their emails and so on. Terrorism cases, serious crime cases, and so on. But this goes a lot further than that. What this is going to do is going to require the phone companies, internet providers, and the like to keep a record of every single communication.
So if I
content of it, but who it's to, and where it's from, and what time it is, and so on. And that includes everything. That includes, tweets, Facebook accesses, web accesses, your emails, Skype calls, telephone calls, text messages, even the location pings that your smartphone does when it checks where you are so it can tell you where the nearest taxi is. All those things will be logged and kept, and the government then will be able to look at them pretty much without restraint whenever it chooses to.
You see, I don't quite get, what the point of that is, and if I text you this afternoon, there's a record of that text. For what purpose?
Well, I think the idea is but bear in mind, the government hasn't made a very good case of explaining exactly why it needs to do it. Indeed, when we were in opposition back in 2009, the Labour government came up with almost exactly the same proposal. It, in fact, came up with two. One was first a centralised database, and the second one, which is pretty close to what this is, which is requiring all the companies to keep the databases. And we opposed it absolutely adamantly. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, and the Shadow Home Secretaries at the time all opposed this vehemently, and all of a sudden it's come back on the surface. And the irony, of course, is that if you or I have a communication, Peter, and I trust neither of us are terrorists or serious criminals, of course we would be logged. But if you were actually a terrorist or a serious criminal and you're trying to avoid this, it's dead easy to do. You just have a prepaid SIM card, so you buy, as it were, off the shelf, or you use an internet cafe and you use a bogus identity on Gmail or Hotmail. You use what's called proxy servers. There are a dozen ways round this process. So the one group of people who won't be caught by it are the serious criminals and terrorists, catching everybody else.
Which is why I don't actually understand why it's being done. But David Cameron says that the new plans to, if you like, invade our privacy will make us safer.
Yeah, well, you see, I just think that's plumb wrong. And
that's wrong, is it?
It's just plumb wrong. And what happens, what tends to happen, when you give a government a power, it tends to use it, not always necessarily for the purposes that it first explained when it introduced the power. There's a thing called the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA it's called, is for short, which was introduced back in 2000, which allows some of this to happen already with telephone calls, not with all the internet and email stuff, but with telephone calls. Now you'd think, okay, that's fair enough if you need to track down terrorists and so on. The last set of numbers we have is it was used 550,000 times in 1 year. That's in 2010.
Right.
550,000 times. Well, that's an awful lot more terrorists than I thought we had. And basically what's been happening is it's been used in all sorts of willy-nilly ways, and famously used to track people who are taking their kids to a school to see if it's the right school and all this sort of nosy Parker stuff. And unfortunately it's going to happen with this new set as well.
But you see, what people will be, or what a lot of people will be listening will be saying is, well, you know, what does it matter if there's been a monitor of me sending you a text this afternoon? If you've done nothing wrong, it doesn't matter one jot, does it?
Well, it's quite interesting. I mean, what it does is it gives the state an ability to collect an amazing amount of information about you. Both in Europe, we've had similar attempts to do similar things, and in Germany, the Constitutional Court struck it down, as it did in the Czech Republic. They struck it down because they thought it was an absolute gross invasion of privacy. And in the German case, an MP actually forced Vodafone, no, it wasn't Vodafone, it was another phone company, but one of the phone companies, to give him the data on himself. Now, he expected to see, you know, all his phone calls and so on. What he also found was 35,000 records of everywhere he'd been for a year. Every 5 minutes of his waking life, they monitored where he was. Now, you know, what business is it of the state to keep data like that?
But it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter one jot. Nobody cares about that, do they?
Well, I think you know, eventually, when you've got this huge picture of people's lives, I mean, you end up. I mean, the countries that are most sensitive about this are countries like Germany, where they've had the Stasi in the past, and the Czech Republic, where they've had the equivalent. And so on. Once they know what states do when they have too much information about you, they get very sensitive about it. So it does matter. And in any event, my privacy is my privacy. It doesn't belong to the state. I don't mind if they think I'm doing something and they're willing to go to a magistrate and get the information, or to a judge,
right,
and get a warrant. I am perfectly happy with that. And under those circumstances, you know, fill your boots, find out what you need to know about me. But unfortunately, this is not that. This is actually surveillance of the innocent, not the guilty. Surveillance
of the innocent, and David Cameron, you just said to me, is plumb wrong.
Just plumb wrong.
I mean, you have said that before, but
I've said it to him. I've said it to him before.
I mean, I'm sure you have. What about the other MPs? Do you think they're with you on this, or?
Well, they vary. Quite a lot are, yes, quite a lot are. But I think what's going to affect this, truthfully, Peter, is the sheer number of members of the public who are against it.
Yeah.
We sent out an email to a lot of people, a couple of months ago, in conjunction with an organisation called 38 Degrees, and within 4 days, they had 137,000 people signed up to the online petition on the matter. 4 days.
God.
So it tells you quite how sensitive. I think people are beginning to realise that having their lives in the public domain can be pretty uncomfortable. And bear in mind that if all these databases are kept, it won't just be the government that tries to get at them. It will be other people too. I mean, we are sitting, as we speak, the Leveson inquiry is sitting about the hacking of people's phone numbers and voicemails and so on. Well, imagine if you... one of the things that we do know does sometimes happen is if a paparazzi are trying to find a particular celebrity, they get someone to check where their phone is at that time. Do what they ping it, is the technical term. And you may not want that. You may not want to have the paparazzi on your doorstep every time they choose to, rather than you choose to.
Well, as I say, I think a lot of people will be right behind you on this one. Just before I let you go, let me just ask you very briefly about Theresa May announcing these tough new measures on immigration laws and getting tough. Have the courts failed, do you think, to uphold immigration laws? And
yes, they have. I mean, what they've done is they have over-interpreted the right to family life. And to be quite brutal about it, you get somebody come here, he breaks the law here in some way, whether it's a criminal action or he runs somebody down and kills them with his car or whatever, and the state want to send him home perfectly reasonably. And if he has found himself a girlfriend and they've had a baby, that's it, he's got his foot in the door and he can't be removed. And we've even seen cases where the girlfriend or even wife wants rid of them, says, I don't want him. Me to be used as the reason to be here, yet they still stay here. And that's an overinterpretation of the right to family life. It's a European convention right, the right to family life. Now, we don't want governments breaking people's family lives unnecessarily, but this is a point where the balance of safety of the public in Britain has got to be put against the rights of an individual who's broken the law.
And should spouses be allowed to come in if they don't earn?
Oh, this is the other side of the
18.
This is yes. I mean, again, it's a very interesting problem, and I think the government's exactly right on this. What they're saying is that if you're not earning very much money, you should not be able to bring a spouse or relatives into the country and effectively put them on the state. Get to a position where you can't support them, therefore the taxpayer has to. I think that's a perfectly reasonable requirement. If you're going to bring somebody here, you've got to be able to support them yourself, and if you can't, then you can't bring them in. And I think that's, again, it's not unreasonable. It's an approach which balances the interests of the individual with the interests of the country and other taxpayers. And I think that's and it also will allow the government to bring some of the immigration, which is at a too high a level, under control, and I approve of that.
And this Britishness test, you would, I don't quite understand it, but you would approve of that, would you?
I think so. I haven't seen the details of that. That's something I have. I would look at that. But speaking English is quite important. If you're going to live in England, being able to speak English is quite important. Being able to understand the life in the country is quite important. And I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. Most other countries, pretty civilized countries, Canada, Australia, places like that, have much more rigorous requirements than we do in this respect, and they're right to do so, because we're a very tolerant country, we're a very welcoming country, but you can take, if you put too much pressure on communities, you damage that. And actually, I do worry about that. We're really nice people, the Brits, and I don't want it turning sour because we're overloading that goodwill.
And the last question: those who have done wrong, I mean, figures show that more than 100 criminals a month who the ministers hope to deport are released from jail onto the streets.
Yeah.
Is that because they're scared of the European Court? Is it?
In essence, well, it's because the courts will find against the government as it currently stands. And it goes back to the European Court. But actually, ironically, our own court sort of over-interpreted European Convention rights in a way that other European courts, sort of French, Belgian and German courts haven't done. So that's why Theresa May's right to say we should have Parliament state its view. I mean, bear in mind, I must admit, I'm sort of bound to support this, because the thing I did on prisoner votes of saying, this is a dispute between a court and Parliament must prevail, is exactly what she's now doing with this.
Yeah.
She's saying that Parliament must decide, not the courts, and that's how in Britain that should be.
I think you got a lot of support from many people on these two today. Mr. Davis, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Nice talking to you.
Have a good day. David Davis, the MP for Horton, Price and Howden, two subjects there in one. If you want to comment on that, or indeed any of our topics today, if you want to.